Good morning, guys. Welcome to the Rosemont Cemetery. It's probably one of the most perfect days I possibly could have asked for to be out here collecting data. So before you guys get the data and start analyzing it, I'm going to take you on a tour of the cemetery, talk a little bit about the history and why this is a good cemetery to use, talk a little bit about some non-human population related things that I would have talked to you guys about while we're out here. And that's about it. There's a couple historical things I'll point out too. So awesome. I wish you guys were here. I really do, because this would have been a great day. So why the Rosemont Cemetery? The Rosemont Cemetery was established in 1729 during New Jersey's colonial times. It's a 12-acre cemetery located right on Route 519 in Rosemont. So you've probably seen it if you've driven down 519 towards Stockton. It's a beautiful location, and it's also not far from my house, which is one reason why I chose this spot for our lab. Because the cemetery is so old, it's a great spot to collect real, authentic data to analyze when it comes to human survivorship. The cemetery's age also allows us to collect data from headstones of people who died before 1900 and those that died after 1900. If we didn't have the awesome resource, we'd be stuck collecting data from those that died before 1950 and those that died after 1950, with 1950 being the point at which antibiotics and what we define as modern medicine were introduced. Rosemont Cemetery is currently offering traditional burials, cremation burials, and green burials in a section of the property known as the Rosemont Memorial Garden. Here, caskets or cremated remains, they call them cremains, can be buried, but those choosing this method are buried without a vault or embalming fluid. Instead, they are buried in biodegradable containers made of renewable resources, allowing the body or ashes to return naturally to the earth with minimal impact on the environment. I was actually in a pretty good spot and didn't even realize it. Let me turn it this way a little bit. There you go. Okay, so we're going to look at these two headstones. This one and this one. They look really different. They look different in terms of like their shape and stuff, but they're also made of two different rocks. This one is limestone, marble, and this one is granite. Okay, limestone is a sedimentary rock. It is really susceptible to weathering. Granite is more resistant. So even if you have two headstones that are from the same time, this one's 1895. And this one's 1862. Okay, so this one's about 30 years older. Even though this one is older, if it was made out of granite, it would still look really good, okay? Because granite is a much tougher rock. The other thing that you see while you're out here when it comes to weathering is that the headstones that face that direction, okay, that's west. I'm facing east. You can tell because the sun's like in my eyes. The headstones that are facing west tend to get weathered and beaten more because the wind and the weather comes from the west. And something else that happens here in New Jersey, our precipitation is naturally acidic, right? So it's got a lower pH. Limestone, when you eat Tums, you're essentially eating limestone. Tastier limestone, mint flavored limestone, or berry flavored limestone, but you're eating limestone, okay? So when limestone comes into contact with acid, it pits like this, right? It dissolves more so than granite, okay? So a lot of the older headstones, and I'm going to take pictures as we go along, and I'll put it together for you. A lot of the older headstones are limestone, so they're a lot harder to read. If you were out here collecting data from before 1900, you would have a tougher time because most of the headstones from that time are limestone. Okay? If you had a lot of money at that point and you died before 1900, you could afford a granite headstone. Okay? So we're dealing with weathering, we're dealing with geology, we're dealing with acid precipitation. There's a lot going on here. So this is one of the older headstones. It's got initials MR, April 16th, 1784. age 55 years. We can't really use it because we don't know if MR is male or female, but a lot of the really early headstones are actually chunks of rock called the Stockton sandstone. It's the same kind of stuff that the brownstone buildings that are really expensive in New York City are made out of. They quarried it locally and then built buildings out of it in New York City. So lots of the really, really old headstones are going to just have initials and maybe the date of death and the age. So we can't really use them because we need to be able to determine male or female, but it's still really cool. One famous person buried in the Rosemont Cemetery is Daniel Bray. Daniel Bray was a captain on General George Washington's staff during the American Revolutionary War. Captain Bray, along with members of the Hunterdon County Militia under his command, collected the boats necessary for crossing the Delaware River on the night of December 25th to 26th, 1776, prior to the Battle of Trenton. After the war, he became a general in the New Jersey State Militia. The boats played a very prominent part in the attack on Trenton. A large portion of New Jersey's Route 29 is named the Daniel Bray Highway in honor of Captain Bray's vital role in this critical phase of the Revolutionary War. Bray is buried in the cemetery along with his wife Mary and his oldest son John. This lab required that we collect data from headstones of both males and females that were deceased before 1900 and both males and females that were deceased after 1900. We set the limit at 1999. We had to collect 100 pieces of data from each group for a total of 400 pieces of data. We recorded the date of birth and date of death for each individual, or we collected the age that they were at death because lots of the older headstones provided that information for us. You'll see the exact data we collected in a Google Sheets form that I've shared with you. If the age at death is given, you don't have to do the math. If birth dates and death dates are given, you'll have to do the subtraction to determine their age at death. Aaron and I spent a good part of the morning collecting the pre-1900 data because the headstones were so hard to read thanks to the degradation of the limestone marble that was used in the early days of the cemetery.